Hello there, my name's Louise and today I'm going to show you how to make a Christmas door wreath using a variety of foliage, some moss, a wire ring and some mossing pins and some real wire. And I do provide this as a kit on my website, so you can follow the link below if you want to get a kit. But if you have access to all of these things, then feel free to go and get your own and I'll show you how to make it today. So we'll get started. So the first thing you need to do is you need to attach your wire to your ring, and all you need to do with that is just twist the wire around the top section of the ring so that it sits like that. Then we're going to take our moss, just take a handful of moss. And what we want to create is a base from which we're going to put all the foliage on top of. So just where you've attached your wire, you want to put a handful of moss over the top of the wire and take the wire around the moss. So you're sort of securing it and you're going to make kind of a big sausage of moss all the way around the wire. Just grab another handful. That around. The main reason I use the moss in this way is because the moss is quite wet, and so when you're putting the foliage onto the moss at a later stage, it gives the foliage just a sort of little opportunity to stay a little fresher for a little bit longer. And it makes the whole thing kind of reusable for whatever season, for whatever wreath you might want to make. So the idea is once the season is over, you can take all the foliage off that might have dried out, and then you'll still have all this moss on the ring. And you can dry the ring off in your shed or somewhere. And then the following year, you can bring it out again, plunge the moss into some water, and the moss will come to life again. And then you can use that again, whether you want to do your spring wreath or whether you want to do a summer wreath, and then the autumn one. And then you can use the same base for every season. So you just keep going round, take quite a big handful so that you've got quite a solid base. And take the wire, keep the wire on the reel, obviously, the whole way round. And then just pack it quite nicely. And in the kit that I provide, on my website, you'll have all of this. You won't need to do anything other than get yourself a good pair of scissors or a pair of secateurs for while you're making it. But everything that I'm showing you today will be in the kit. So, and then just keep going around. Feel free to use all of the moss, but you know, if you have moss left over, it's fine. I use moss like this for planting my hyacinth bulbs for Christmas, amaryllis, any of the bulbs really. It's really useful. Gets to a bit where it's a bit thinner, just add another little bit. Okay, so when you get to the end, when you're happy that your ring looks kind of fairly firm, fairly solid, and it's a nice mossed base, take the wire round to the back of your wreath, and you'll probably be able to see there's a bit of the copper wire sticking out there. Just take the end of the wire, poke it through, and wind it round and secure it. And that way you have a lovely wired moss ring. I mean, they look quite nice as they are like this. If you've got nice green moss like this, you can just use that to hang. But we're going to do some embellishments today. Okay. Next bit I'm going to show you is putting some plastic backing onto the back of your wreath. Now this stage is not essential, and if you don't like using plastic, then please feel free to leave this bit out. But what it does do is it gives a slight protection to the back. So if you're going to put this on your very expensive front door, you don't really want the moss damaging your door. So the idea is that you just keep this on the back of it so that it protects your door. And the second reason is that it does help a little bit to keep the moisture in the moss, so the moss doesn't dry out as quickly as it might. But again, it's not essential. So what we're going to do this is we're going to take our mossing pins. These are just little prongs that you can use. And the idea that we're only going to cover one side, the back side of the moss ring. And so what I'd like you to do is put your pins directly into the center, diagonally into the moss, and take the wrap to the other side and place another pin directly opposite the one that you just put in. Then you're going to take the wreath wrap at a diagonal and take it over the last bit of wrap that you put on and put another pin directly into the side. So what you're doing is you're just zigzagging the wreath wrap all the way around, and you're only putting pins in the sides. And then you're going to take the wrap again over the top of that pin on a diagonal and put the pin in the opposite side. And all you're going to do is just keep doing that until you've covered the... So just to show you again, it's just the back side that you're covering here, not the front side. We're leaving that completely mossed. And so you're just taking the wreath wrap backwards and forwards at a slight angle so that you're covering all of the moss at the back and covering the pin that you've just put in, and then putting the pin again on this side and then bringing it back over and putting the pin on that side. You don't want to go too close together, otherwise you'll just run out of wrap. And again, you don't actually need to purchase this particular wreath wrap. You can just cut up a bin bag into strips, and it has exactly the same effect. There we go. I always find this quite therapeutic, actually. It gives you an opportunity to just chill and think about Christmas. when I run my in-person workshops, these kind of moments are the times when people just get the opportunity to have a drink, have a chat. It's just one of those things that once you know exactly how to do it, you can just get on with it, and that enables you to just do this whilst you're chatting to your friends, catching up, having a drink. And then we get to the end. Take the final piece over. Doesn't matter whether it's on the inside or the outside, it really doesn't make a difference. And then just cut your wreath wrap like that. So then you have hopefully a very neat covering to the back of your wreath. And again, just to show you that it's just on the one side, so it's just the back side, and then when you then put that on the back of your door, it's not going to get damp or mouldy or do any damage to a nice clean door. Okay, so that's all. We don't need the pins anymore. Okay, so now you have your finished wreath base. We're going to add some foliage to give it that kind of Christmassy feel. So you can use, if you've got the kit, you'll have about 4, maybe 5, depending on the kit at the time, different types of foliage to put onto your wreath. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. What I need to do is, what I want to do is build some little bunches. So the idea is that you take a bit of all of the different types of foliage that you've got there and just layer them on top of each other. And the idea is to use foliage that gives a different feel. So you're getting lots of different structures and textures and colours, and that's the thing that will give you the more interesting looking wreath. If you can just use lots of different kind of colours and different types of foliage. If you can use all evergreen, then that's great. But a lot of the foliage that's around at this time of year will last, and especially this is going to be on your front door, so it's going to be pretty cold, and the moss is going to keep it a little bit more moist, so you'll be fine. So the idea is that you make up a little bunch like that, and then we're going to attach it to our wreath. If you want to you can wire these individually and then make them all the little bunches and then do this process. But just for ease, today I'm just going to do it directly onto the wreath. So the idea is that you keep the stems on the wreath, so they mustn't come off this side and they mustn't come off this side. And then you get your reel wire again, and also keeping it on the reel, put the wire underneath your thumb and just hold it steady. And then again, just take the wire around your base a few times, just so that holds quite nicely. And then we're going to do the same again. I mean, you don't have to use the same foliages every single time. You can mix it up, but for this demonstration, I'm just going to use similar foliages as I go round, just to give it some kind of uniformity. So there we go. I've got those bits of foliage there. And so the next place I'm going to put the foliage, the bunch, is just slightly further around and to cover these stems here. So the idea is that you're going to sweep your bunches around your wreath, covering the last attachment. And then you just take your wire around again, pull it fairly firmly so that it stays in place. And then you can always move the stems around as you go. And then again, it's always a good idea to back each piece with a piece of spruce, if you can get hold of spruce, because it's fairly firm, it's very Christmassy, and it gives you a nice base. And then you can just add the other bits. This eucalyptus, buried eucalyptus is lovely because it just adds that sort of beautiful texture. And then when you've got the different types of foliage, you just get a bit of movement, and so when your wreath is up on the door, it just looks much more natural. So again, I want to cover up these stems here, so I'm going to place that over the top, and I'm going to take the wire again quite firmly around the stems there. This is the next bit that gets quite therapeutic when you kind of decide what you'd like to have and how you'd like your wreath to look, what foliages you can play around with. And once you kind of know what you're doing, this is the next bit where you can sort of chat to people, have a drink, eat something. This whole process is just such a nice thing to do with friends, whether in person or whether you're following this just online. It's a nice way to pass an evening. And again, we want to place that over the top of the stems that you had before. Also helps sometimes as you're going around is just to try and get the stems to be a bit cleaner at the bottom. It's absolutely not necessary, but sometimes it just helps with the grip down here when you've got clean stems, and it just helps the wire to grip on. If you're lucky enough to have a nice garden full of foliage, then yeah, you've got a really good head start. You can just go out into the garden, snip away and create something really personal. If you're not lucky enough to have a garden, you can either go foraging, some places allow you to forage, or you can find all of this stuff in your local florist. Or as I say, I have a kit that you can buy online. I can post it out. And a nice thing to do is just get the girls over, get the guys over, get your friends over, and just have a bit of fun. You see now you've got the textures, it kind of moves a little bit, which just makes it so pretty. It doesn't really matter what you use, I don't think. Just, whatever you can find foliage-wise will definitely work. The other reason that I kind of quite like to use moss to base it with is that if you do get to a point where you've got a bit of a gap and you want to add something in quite simply, you can use the moss to poke, I'll show you in a second, to poke the foliage into the moss, and it will stay. Just gives you the added flexibility. And I think here we might need maybe one, maybe two. When you get to the end, oh, I just love this fern, it's so nice. That. Then all you do, I think we might need two more here, so I'm going to just put this one here. And then like that. And then all you need to do is slightly lift up the first one that you did and place this slightly further in, and then gently just take the wire over the top of those stems. To secure it there. And then you can move that one slightly round, just cover up the stems of that one. And then you've got quite a lot of movement going on there, and it looks, I've just noticed that here I've got a bit of a gap. So you can either choose to take your wire around to that section, and then we can make another little one. Put in there. So we just move this one slightly up and place that in there like that, and then take the wire over the top of that. Okay, so that's your finished foliage section of your wreath. And then just to secure the wire, we're just going to cut that wire and find a bit of wire like that and secure it into there like that. So that's your finished foliage part of your wreath. And again, going back to what I said before, if you feel like you want to add something extra, you can just poke foliage into the moss, and as the moss stays quite nice and wet, you can add little bits and pieces as much as you want. I mean, when I start doing that, it just ends up never stopping. But at least you know that way, if you've got your moss there, you can add little bits, you can cover things up. And if you've got any gaps that are bugging you, you can just put the foliage directly into the moss. Let's do that, put that in there. Perfect. So you could just stop there. That would make a beautiful wreath to put on your door. but I tend to go a little bit further. And I want to put some nice kind of pine cones. You can put some orange slices and some ilex berries, some red berries, whether you find these in your garden, whether you purchase them from wherever you can get them from, or, you know, if you've got some fake bits and pieces that you want to pop on, totally up to you. But I will just show you how I would attach and wire cones and slices, and we can attach them as they would be in your kit anyway. But this just gives you lovely. Okay, so if we want to wiring our cones, ideally you want to have a cone that's just kind of attached like that, but you don't really want to see the wire as much. So a little technique that I have is, oh, they're all wired at the moment, take this one, is to take one of your wires, you have these in your kit, and place the wire in between the cones, like so, and then just weave the wire all the way around until you can join them up together, and then just twist. And keep twisting until you have just one leg like that. And then that's your wired cone. And then you can wire as many cones as you've got. And the idea of the way to put them in is, again, these poke really nicely into the moss. And the best way to do it is if you put the cone in at an angle. So you put the wire into the moss at an angle, and then you bend the wire back on itself so that your cone kind of nestles in amongst the foliage. You don't want them all to be sort of right on the top. You want them to kind of nestle in and make it look a lot more natural. So I'll show you that one more time, just so you can see how I do that. So you take your cone and you sideways put your wire in amongst the pines, and then take it all the way around until they join up, and then you just twist. And you're just trying to make those two legs into one. And then you go the opposite way, so the cone is facing down, and you push the wire into the moss, and then you bend the wire back so the cone just sits quite nicely in amongst the foliage. And then you wire as many things as you've got, and then you keep doing that as you go around. And you bend that over. I mean, in floristry, we tend to work in odd numbers. So, you know, go for 3 cones, 5 cones, 7, whichever you've got. But, you know, those are just rules. And rules, as we know, are made to be broken. So you can put as many as you want on your wreath. And they don't necessarily all have to be at the front. You can put some on the side. Depends how you're going to be displaying your wreath and whether people are going to see the top or the bottom. It's not behaving itself. Just go forward. Okay, and then we have our oranges. So these are orange slices that are just dried. You can make these yourself. There's lots of YouTube tips on how to dry these in the oven, or you can just simply buy them. But I don't recommend using fresh because they will just go mouldy and you don't want that. So again, with that, I'll show you that again actually. Sometimes I just get on with things and I forget that I'm teaching. So you get three, what I like to do is have three together. So you have three oranges, one on top of the other, and you just push the wire through the fleshy bit, and the same that we did with the cones, just bring the two wire legs together and then twist. And the reason I like doing that is because when you put them in, they kind of fan out like that, so it just makes a really pretty addition to your wreath. And then again, exactly the same, you just push the wire into the moss and bend the wire back on itself so that it kind of just pokes out of the foliage just like that. I'll show you that again. So you get three together, lay them on top of each other, and then push the wire through the fleshy bit of the orange, pull the wires together, and then twist in exactly the same way. And then again, however many of these you want to do, push the wire into the moss. Like that. Okay, so now you have the addition of the oranges, which just gives, I think, a kind of little lift to all the foliage, just makes it a little bit more interesting. And then the other thing that I like to put on is a little bit of ilex berry. So if you've got holly in your garden, just grab some holly out of the garden. But you can buy ilex berries in your local florist, or as I say, it'll be in my kit. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with this. Just find a place to rest your wire, hold it underneath your thumb and pull the stems together. And then whilst holding the wire, just take one of the legs over the item that you want to wire and over the other piece of wire. And then you're creating a little stem like that. So that's attached to that now. So then again, same principle. You just push the wire into the stem, into the moss, sorry, and kind of it can stick out, you can lay them flat, totally up to you. Just play around. But also when you do have the moss, the other possibility is that you can just stick these directly into the moss. So if you haven't got wires or if you don't have the time, just pop that directly into the moss. And that does exactly the same thing. Give yourself a nice bit of a leg there. You can always cut everything. If you cut thick stems on an angle, you're creating a much pointier stem, which will give you a much easier access into the moss. And you push that in like that. That one there. Give that one a cut onto the angle. And just place it directly into the moss. We used to use moss before we had the green foam to do our flower arranging. So it's a perfect, sustainable way to use for your flower arranging. I'm going to put that up here, just put that straight into the moss. Okay. It's probably a little bit high. I'm going to cut that in half. To put that one back in there. And then I'm going to use that one to put just inside there. So there we have it. You have your completed Christmas door wreath. And the very final stage is how you're going to use ribbon to hang it on your door. I like to use lovely red ribbon, but equally green. Anything that you've got that looks Christmassy and festive. And the idea is that you just go and poke the ribbon between the foliage and your mossed wreath. So you've got your ribbon coming out like that, and then that will be all that you need to hang it onto your door. So when you're hanging this onto your door, my top tip is, if you have a wooden door, is to take the ribbon over the top of your door and place a drawing pin, you know, those flat head pins, directly into the top of the door. And that way you can see the ribbon and you don't see the attachment. If, however, you don't have a wooden door, best advice is to hang it on the door knocker. Yeah. And there we have our completed wreath.